Well, excellent. Well, we're excited to have Bruce with us today. He's one of those rare animals who's not only a accomplished novelist, but also an accomplished editor. So he lives in both worlds, and he's going to tell us the secrets.
I don't know if they're secrets, but I'll tell you my experiences. First off, I want to say that when I have an audience, the first thing that happens is I lose the ability to tell time. So if I'm taking up too much time, let me know. I also somewhat lose my ability to read, so I'll try to look at my notes, but who knows. So let's get going. Okay, thanks to Paul for setting this up and Glenn for continuing with it. I wanted to talk about editing, anachronisms, and hands-on research today. And first, my bona fides. As an editor, I've edited books for Rick Spillman over at Old Salt Press. If anybody reads the nautical stuff, you're probably familiar with him. Eva Ouellette and Linda Collison, they've been published in Fireship Press and Old Salt. Let's see, I recently did a book for Books, my publisher. They kind of quietly bought up everybody's back catalog of nautical fiction a while back, and so they're kind of the go-to place for that. I've been writing and editing horror, editing some Bizarro horror, which I'd never even heard about. I went to the Bizarro convention up in Portland this past November, and there's some very strange people out there. They're friendly, but they're strange. But I edited a script and did the American dialogue for an Irish indie movie about the IRA, which went nowhere, but I didn't think it would. It was just kind of a fun project. I've done vampire novels. I have a tendency to work with people just because I like the project. If I like the project, I'll do it for way cheap and I'll do a lot of work on it. If I don't like it, I'll just, Jimmy Carl Black from Mothers of Invention, he said, as long as I get my beer and I get paid, I'll do anything. I'm a professional. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I've been doing this for a long time. I started out in newspapers. I was doing production, and then desktop publishing came along and ruined a lot of jobs, so I switched over to the editorial side. And I've been doing that ever since. As a writer, I've had the 3 novels from the Matty Graves series. I had a 4th one, but it didn't quite work out. I went on to other things. I've been writing a horror novel. The original title was 4 Little Kids and How They Die, but my writing group told me that wasn't a really great title. So, as a lot of you may know, the first thing a publisher does is they change the title anyway, so I wasn't too worried about it. But they wanted something else. So that was The Crazy Adorable Corpses. I've written a lot of nonfiction books, mostly marketing stuff, newspaper articles, a lot of music, songs. So anyway, I think of it as being able to sit on both sides of the table. I understand what it's like to be a writer being edited. I also understand what it's like to be the editor working for a publisher. You're in a business. You want to end up with the product you can sell, and it's the writer's book, but it's a product. So you kind of got to work with that. And in my experience, the worst writers are the hardest to work with. They don't want you to change anything. The best writers are, I'm a professional, go right ahead. I've sold it to you. You can do whatever you want. So mostly it's in between. My job as an editor is to turn the book into the book that the writer thinks that they've written or wants to have written. And when everything goes right, the writer can't really tell that you've been there. You just kind of gone in and tidied things up, and you stitch things together, so it doesn't look like Frankenstein's monster, And other times you really got to jump in there with the machete in one hand and the buzzsaw in the other and tear it apart. And when I edit my own stuff, the first thing I try to do is grab and shake it. Whatever falls off didn't belong there in the first place. Which is fine because I'm a big believer in reuse and recycling. If you take something out because it's not working, you can always use it someplace else. It's not like it's dead. You can still use it someplace else. Change the names, change the time, change the gender. It's completely different. And what I try to remember is the same approach that I try to remember to take in life, which is why did they do it that way? Do they know that they did it that way? Is it wrong that they did it that way? And am I helping? And I find that in personal relationships and in editing, it tends to work pretty well. Another thing I do is I don't think I brought it. Every time I begin a project, and every time right before I send it to the author or the publisher, I always read Nathan Bransford's 10 Commandments of Editing Somebody's Work. The first thing that he says, and I try to remember it's not your book. I was a copy chief at a newspaper a while back, and I was training a woman to be a copy editor, and she had changed some stuff, and I asked her why she changed it. She said, I didn't like the way it was written. And I said, well, you don't get a vote. That's not your art. Was it wrong? No. Is there something misleading about it? No. Is it ambiguous? No. Then don't change it. You might be able to write it better, but it's not yours. So leave that alone. He also says, don't be too nice, but don't be a jerk either. Sometimes you have to be firm. You have to be upfront with people. You have to let them know what's going on, but you can't be a jerk. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll go through, I'll keep my hands away from the keyboard, and I'll just read the first thing. So I tend to do a first read on my phone because I can't edit it. Because if I have it on my laptop, I'm going to start making notes. It's like, no. I just read it and see what's actually there. And then when I go through on the second read, when I'm actually editing, I will put in a lot of notes. And sometimes, I've got a sense of humor, and it's not always pleasant. It's like, aren't I witty? And that stuff all has to come out. So when I'm doing my third read, I go through and I take all that stuff out. And before I send it back to the author for the first round of edits from the author, I take a lot of stuff out and I'll just summarize it. I'll just do a red line. I just write stuff in red. And I try to remember the critique group sandwich. You start out with something nice, and then you get to the meat of it, and then you end with something nice. So you help the person, and you remember, just like yourself, no matter how thick somebody's skin is, the ego is still out there. You're really exposing yourself when you're opening yourself to editing or critique. It's a very brave thing to do, and you have to respect that. That said, sometimes people just cry and they're whiners, and I was working with an editor for this anthology, and like he was the worst writer in the group. His piece was terrible, and I was trying to make it a better piece and trying not to hurt his feelings, but just the thought that somebody might question anything he wrote was just unbearable to him, and so he withdrew from the project, which I was glad of because I didn't want it in the book anyway. But I was nice to him, I think. And as a writer, I bear in mind that professional writers welcome edits. The editor really is trying to help you. The editor really is your friend. The editor is trying real hard to keep you from looking stupid. The worst writers are the most resistant, and I've had my days. I had the editor that worked with me on the Manna Graves stuff. She was working with me on this horror novel, and I sent it to her too early, and she had a lot to say about it, and I didn't like a lot of what she said. And I had to sit on it for a year, and I was crying to go, she's terrible, I don't even like her anymore. And then I set it aside for a while because this wasn't happening. And then when I picked it up again and I looked at her notes, and I was like, well, she didn't have to be so funny about it, but she's right. So I went, what's that?
I hate it when they're right.
I hate it when they're right. Oh, damn it. Even my mom, she was an agent. She was an editor, and then she was an agent. She looked at it too, and she had all kinds of stuff to say. Like, Mom, no, she was giving me a professional opinion. She wasn't giving her mom's opinion. One of the things Nathan says is like, figure out what the person wants. If they just want to be patted on the back and told, "Good job," then go ahead and do that. It saves everybody a lot of trouble, and they could go off and they can play with it. If they really want to get into it, come up with something publishable, there's no guarantees that that's going to be published, but if that's what you want to work for, then you go for it. And I remember that the publisher is my customer. They're giving me money to do something, and they're putting up the money for it. If you're self-publishing, if you don't doing your own thing, you can do whatever you want. But if you're working with a publisher, you got to remember they're putting up money. It's a business. And they're not mercenary about it. They're in the business. Most of them are not getting rich. They're in the business because they really like books. They really like what they're doing, and so you got to help them out. How I edit myself is to cut out the boring parts. I think is Hitchcock said something about movies are just like real life with the boring bits cut out. So you got to cut out the boring bits. Our part is figuring out what the boring parts are. There's stuff that you think is beautiful. Oh, the sunset was so gorgeous, and you go on for 3.5 pages describing the sunset, and it doesn't lead to anything. So get rid of it. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear your dreams. the dearest person to be in my life is my wife, and wake up in the morning and she will tell me her dreams for 45 minutes in complete detail, you know, and it's like, okay, the first 5 minutes was great, and now I really want to read the newspaper, you know. So some stranger telling me about stuff that I don't care about. I'm going to turn the page, I'm going to put the book aside, I'm going to go do something else. So try to remember that. When I was at BizarroCon, which I mentioned, I did a workshop with this guy, John Skett. He's an LA author. I was a participant. I didn't have any organizing function in it. But what his workshop was about was to write a kill scene, and scene in which somebody gets killed, and to strip it down as far as you can, so the absolute bare bones, no pun intended. Just make it as concise as possible, as tight as possible. Anything that doesn't advance the story, and preferably gives characterization and advances the story, get rid of it. So I took a chapter from the book I'm working on, and it was pretty tight. And I took about 12 pages, I think it was, and I just started taking stuff out that didn't absolutely have anything to do with it. And I ended up with a little less than 5 pages of stuff. And it was tight. It was really good. I was really pleased with it. And it was a lot easier than I thought it would be, but I really had to use a lot of discipline, a lot more discipline than I usually do. And it was a lot of work, but I really liked the product I ended up with. So it was a lesson on just not showing yourself any mercy, you know, just looking at the writing as a piece of writing. It's not your baby, it's a piece of writing. But try to go easy on symbolism and metaphor. If you're a metaphorical poet, great. You know, if you're a symbolist, whatever, yeah, that's fine. I personally don't care about it. Other people do. I grew up reading literature. Both my parents were librarians, and I read everything. You know, Jonathan Swift, comic books, whatever I could get my hands on. That's what I read. We didn't have a TV, so I read all the time. So I was exposed to a lot of stuff, and it was fun. I read it because it was enjoyable. And then in college, I studied literature, and to this day, I'm really reluctant to pick up anything literate, because like, oh, okay, I have to study all this symbolism. Find the symbol. Oh yes, Willy Loman. Willy is a diminutive of a penis. You know, it's just like took the joy out of it. You know, yes, so now what I tend to read is like detective fiction. You know, it's like police thrillers. You know. My brain isn't working around. Did you have? Oh, I thought somebody had a question. So anyway, I just read for escapism now, and I think a lot of people do. And there's nothing wrong with that. Historical fiction is genre fiction. I love genre fiction. And where I went to school, it was like there was literature and there was genre. Oh, we don't do genre here, boy. You know? It's like I do. And so one of my goals, and I haven't been able to do it yet, was to get rich enough to endow a chair in genre fiction. Just to love it. You want the money, you gotta do this. But that hasn't happened. Another thing that I'm big on is killing characters that people care about. Like George Martin, somebody mentioned George Martin, Game of Thrones. One of the infuriating things about it, but one of the things I really love about it, is you get really invested in this character, and you know nothing's going to happen to this character because they're really important to the story, and then he kills them. And you wonder, okay, well, that guy isn't the main character. Who's the main character? So anyway, I love that he does that, and I've had books where, you know, they want some drama, and so they want, you know, to demonstrate how dangerous it is to sail around Cape Horn. So they have somebody, you know, fall off the rigging or get slammed by a wave, and it's like somebody you've never heard of. You don't care. You know, I want Jack the Bosun, who's like a really great guy, and you know, he's like the captain's right-hand man, and everybody loves this guy, and he's tough on him, and he's really exciting and colorful. I want him to go overboard because I care about him. So otherwise, it's like, okay, you wanted somebody to die, who cares, you know? Which can be really inconvenient when you're writing. But it can be fun too, because it makes you look at the story in a new way. That's makes me think I got to kill this kid. This may be getting into territory that you guys argue about a lot. I don't know, but I tend to think of historical novels as being placed on a continuum. You know, on the one hand, there's first-hand accounts and textbooks, and on the other hand, there's absolute nonsense and stuff I like tends to be in between. Like Hornblower. I grew up reading the Hornblower books, C.S. Forester, and a lot of it is nonsense, and a lot of what we think of as being absolutely true about the Royal Navy comes from our perceptions from reading Hornblower, and a lot of it just isn't true. You get a lot more of that in Patrick O'Brien's stuff, He's really done his research, which isn't to say that Forrester didn't know what he was talking about, but he was a really important propagandist for Britain during World War II. A lot of the military fiction he wrote takes place during World War II, and it's the doughty British standing up to the Germans and stuff like that, which is true, but it was definitely propaganda. So Forrester is he's very much an Anglophile, being British, but they're fun books. So anyway, the continuum. I mean, there's on the one hand, I got a 1-star review once because I hadn't included footnotes in a novel, and then it's a novel. The only novel I could think of offhand that was a historical novel with footnotes was the Flashman series by George MacDonald Fraser. And the footnotes are part of the story because the conceit is that it's an editor who has found a Balgavarized a manuscript of Flashman's memoirs, and he digs into it and he finds out what actually happened. And part of the shocker is that Flashman, he has a Victoria Cross, and he's a great military hero, and he's this long confession of what a coward he was, and what a rake he was, and all these terrible things he did, and they're extremely funny. And the footnotes are explaining, he'll explain, okay, well, the person who originally edited the manuscript took this part out, but I found this article. But then other times he does something that's pretty clever, and he keeps it to a minimum. He'll have Flashman use an item or refer to an event to justify one of his actions in the book that actually didn't take place, or happened later, or wasn't around, or Flashman couldn't have done. And he'll say Flashman's memory apparently is failing him at this point, or he's confused with this later thing. It's really clever, and you can see Fraser doing that, and it's really funny because okay, and you read, but wait a minute, oh, there's a footnote, and then you read it, and you go, oh, that's quite clever there, So anyway, that's the only time I've ever seen footnotes in a historical novel, and they're extremely funny, but the idea that you have to document it.
It's a great fantasy, I think.
Yeah.
I've been tempted because you write something that you say somebody's going to come up and say that didn't happen.
They will.
They will.
They absolutely will.
And instead of arguing with them, which you can't really do anyway, you slip a little footnote in there.
You can't argue with them.
You can't do it though.
Well, I mean, there are ways of dealing with it. Like Patrick O'Brien, when he wrote Master and Commander, he was thinking of it as a one-off, as he explains in the author's note to the second novel. He wasn't planning on writing a second novel. So it's the only time I believe that he included an author's note. He says, I was only expecting the first book to be a one-off, so I ended up with a whole bunch of extra material. So this book takes place at the same time as the previous book, and here's why, And so he just explained it, and then it's okay because he says, yes, I'm aware of this, and this is what happened. The
other thing you can do in that situation is have a character express doubt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And they kind of stay in the stead for the reader, and you kind of slip in your argument.
Absolutely, and that's advice I give writers. It's like, if you're going to keep this in here, it's unbelievable circumstances, this incredible coincidence. Have somebody say, wow, what an amazing coincidence, and then it's okay. It doesn't look like an accident. It looks like you did it on purpose. Oh, that's right. I remember another time I got dinged. I had a vessel that Matty's sailing, and it's just a put together thing. He kind of like does the dirty work for this Commodore, and it's just a cobbled together ship. It's like put together with the odds and ends that they scraped out of the barrel and gave to him to go off and do this mission. And he is armed with 3-pounders. And what I should have had him say was, wow, I didn't even know we had any 3-pounders, but I thought I made it clear that it was just scraped together with whatever materials I had. And some guy wrote to me saying, those were not standard issue. That would never have happened because they're not standard issue. And I wanted to say to him, if you know anything about the military, what you're supposed to get, what you actually get, very often aren't the same thing. But I should have had something in there, and I also said to him, if I'd known you had existed, I probably would have asked you. And then later on, I thought that was pretty smart. Yeah, I could have gone to an ally instead of smacking him. But anyway, yes, you can have certain anachronisms or ways of dealing with it. Yeah, I wanted to get into anachronisms. I wanted to point out, as I'm sure you know, that Mark Twain said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, except he actually never said that. It's attributed to him. But there is a piece that I read by him. He's talking about somebody said that this farm that Twain mentioned was in the north part of the county instead of the south part of the county, or whatever it was. And Twain said, I'd move entire continents if it was convenient to my story. words along those lines. So he definitely had that attitude, but he wasn't the only one. It's just like he wanted a good story. And I do think there's a constant conflict, especially in historical fiction, between fact and fiction. And you want to be someplace in between, I think. Marvell, the poet, said something about the literature is art has to both entertain and elucidate. And historical fiction, I think, particularly does that, because you're digging into the truth, you're digging into things that happen, they're fascinating stories, but they need to be entertaining too. So I tend to be kind of not lax, but if it's not contradicted by the historical record, I think it's fine. If like in Blackadder, Blackadder has a Richard IV, and it is supposed to be silly. It's silly. That kind of thing. It's comedy. You can get away with a lot more in comedy than you can in drama. But if there's nobody to say that didn't happen, I think it's okay to say it happened, as long as you make it plausible. You can't just throw something in there and say, well, you can't prove that it didn't happen, because people are going to say, well, you can't prove that it did either. So as long as it's plausible. And then there are actual errors of fact. Like the recent book I was editing, the guy has a steering wheel on every vessel of every size. And he didn't seem to understand that a wheel on a sailing ship, well, a wooden ship at least, it's got a barrel on it with ropes, and they go down to pulleys underneath, and they're attached to the tiller, which is attached to the rudder, which moves it. So if you have a smaller vessel, a schooner or a brig, something like that, it's going to have the tiller on the deck. The tiller isn't below; it's on the deck. You actually turn that tiller, especially at that time. But he'd done a lot of sailing in the Caribbean and things like that, modern day sailing, and so his seamanship was impeccable. It really was, but his grasp of historical seamanship wasn't. I couldn't get him away from that, but again, it was his book. And some military protocol, things like that. He wanted to do modern day, or he watched a lot of movies. The book, when I first got it, was kind of at the historical level of the old Zorro TV show. Yeah, and we got it to maybe the level of the Douglas Fairbanks movie. But the thing is, it was really entertaining. I mean, he's just action-packed, just boom, boom, boom. This keeps happening. So it was a really entertaining book. It really was. And really, what I needed to do was he had a bunch of separate scenes, and I needed to, rather than stitch them together, I needed to get them to overlap a bit, so there'd be some continuity to the story. And he was very amenable to that, and so we ended up with something very readable, I think. Then there are perceived anachronisms, things that might seem wrong but aren't. One that comes to mind is the idea that, at least until the mid-19th century, sailors always said larboard for port. Larboard, starboard. It sounds more yarry. It's like sailing geeks say yarry is like har. It sounds a lot more seaman-like. But in fact, port has a long history. It goes way back. There's this guy. John Harlan. He has a seamanship in the Age of Sail, and he talks about like the history of the various terms. Like this one comes from Dutch, this one comes from French, or the Helmsley in English would be "God save us" in French, something like that. So he really gets into that. And again, the 3-pounders that I mentioned, they could have been in there, but if I had flagged it, it would have been fine. So that was my fault. Port versus larboard, which I mentioned, and then there are reliable sources, which again I'm sure you know about, the first-hand accounts and their diaries, and newspapers, journals, letters, and those are all, they may be what somebody actually saw, but it's also a very small view. Your perception of what happened at a battle might be hiding in a basement while the explosions went on. That doesn't mean that's what everybody is doing. But it's an entirely legitimate point of view. And they can disagree because it's true for that person and this is true for that person. And just because they disagree doesn't mean either one of them is wrong. It's just that's the part of the big whole that they saw. This person saw the elephant's tail, this person saw the elephant's trunk. Yes?
This is, in terms of anachronisms and things like this, is something I struggle with periodically. I write murder mystery. It's the details of daily life that show up clues. It's a great place for an anachronism to creep in because you don't necessarily know. And let's be real. Did people write down what how they cooked their lunch that day? They don't. I just cooked lunch. We had a problem with Sahara. We couldn't figure out what the sluice gates in the irrigation system were because, you look at the city record and it says $50 to the Sahara for materials, but doesn't say what the materials are.
Yeah.
So, at what point do you kind of say, all right, I got to get this detail right, but there's really not a lot of good literature on what it might actually have been. Or, or worse yet, like you said with the other anachronism where you want to get it right, but everybody else thinks it's wrong.
Right. Well, I think if you do your due diligence and your research and you can't find what that is, you can use some logic to figure it out. Or you can just say, $50 for materials and leave it at that. Whatever you're more comfortable with. Yeah. The trouble is if you make guesses, even if they're educated guesses, if you get it wrong, somebody will tell you about it.
Yeah.
But even if you get it right, somebody will tell you about it. They won't tell you they're right. They'll say, well, why did you come up with that? What was your source? And you say, Kennedy. And they're like, Kennedy? Oh, God, nobody reached Kennedy. And it's like, well, they're published by the Naval Institute. I mean, I think they know what they're talking about, But if you say, it's kind of you just have to do your best, and your best will be your best.
I did find it out.
You did, okay, yeah.
It took some digging. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing about research is, on the series, I originally did 2 years worth of research, and it was a lot of fun, but I came to the point where I had to stop doing the research and actually start writing. It really did. And I had, way more than I could ever use, and I had lots of scenes where, they were in there because I was showing off my knowledge. As both my mom and my editor said, there's absolutely no reason for this to be in the story except so that you know this. Yeah, that's true. yeah, and you could, I could have them do something that I want to show off, but there has to be something else happening. They're having this conversation about somebody else. It has to have dual purpose. I think every scene, every piece of dialogue has to have dual purpose. It has to advance plot and it has to say something about character. Yeah.
What's your favorite place to look for? Language of an era?
Well, for me, it was the 1811 Dictionary of Buckish Slang. The 1811 Dictionary of Buckish Slang. It has a much longer title than that, and it went through several editions from the late 1800s up to about 1820, I think. One thing that struck me was how much slang had to do with sex and crime and punishment. There are lots of things that are still current. Like, for instance, cheese at Louis, it's the cops. Would have entirely been understood by somebody in the criminal underground in London in 1785. Yeah, things like that.
What was it again?
The 1811 Dictionary of Buckish
No, but
Slang.
about the cops.
Oh, cheese at Louis, it's the cops. Which, I always thought of as like 1930s dead end kids or something like that.
Game Runyon.
There you go. Yeah, but it goes back much earlier than that. And some things that you might think are very early or much later, like I had a character say, he knows his onions. And somebody pointed out to me, that's from the 1920s. Oh, I did more research on it. Yeah, I had assumed. He knows his onion, he knows what he's talking about. And once I thought about it, it's, oh yeah, that really does sound like 1920s slang. Another thing that I think of it. Another thing is visiting the sites where your stories take place. That really helps a lot because you can see why things happened the way they did. Like, for instance, a battle. You go to the site and you can see, oh, there's a hill over there, and there was a building over there, and there was a forest over there, and you can see why people were deployed the way they were. Even though in retrospect, it was a really bad idea. Working with the information that they had, that's what they did, and it made sound sense. Hands-on things like I crewed in the Lady Washington as a replica of a brig. And there was another ship along with them up into the northwest in the late 18th century. The other one was the Columbia Reddita Viva, I think it's called. It's the ship that sails around Tom Sawyer's Island at Disneyland.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a miniature replica of the Columbia. So anyway, for brig, it was pretty good size, but it was originally rigged as a sloop, a single-masted ship. And technically, it's not a ship. The ship has 3 masts in square rigs. But anyway, just being on and feeling things like, the sound of the ropes. A wooden ship, it's wet. It smells like damp wood all the time and tar. And you never get dry. Things like that. It's like even when you're hot, you're still damp and you're kind of cold because you're damp all the time. Just stuff like that. Just hands-on experience is really important. Cooking period food. There's a whole cottage industry surrounding the Captain Aubrey versus the Jack Aubrey books by Patrick O'Brien. One that I really liked was a cookbook. I like cookbooks. I read cookbooks. I watch cooking shows. And it was all about cooking the various dishes that Patrick O'Brien mentions, and he mentions them a lot. They really like their food, like what is spotted dick, things like that. What is lobscouse? So these 2 women did their research on it, and they got period ingredients when they could, and they pointed out that, for instance, meat was a lot leaner back then, especially game. Like when Lewis and Clark were going across the country, they were living on elk primarily, and there was no fat on it. And so the men were starving, even though they had enough protein. They weren't getting enough calories. And they could have eaten salmon, but the first salmon, the Shoshone, I think it was, gave them salmon and it made them really sick. I think because it was too rich for them. So after that, they wouldn't eat salmon, even though it was this incredibly nutritious protein. They wouldn't eat it. So anyway, I cooked some of the dishes from the cookbook. That was interesting. I researched and figured out how to make hardtack, which is even more unpalatable than you might think. It's a lot like eating a cinder block. But I found out that you don't just eat it like a cracker. You smash it up and you use it to thicken gravy, or you make a pie from it. Basically, you use it as breadcrumbs. You smash it up, which I didn't know until I tried it. Wearing period clothes, it really helps. Like Jerry West, I'm sorry she isn't here, like her with her armor, stuff like that. I mean, you really get a feel for it. Like when I was in the Lady Washington, you had to wear what we call funny clothes, which is period clothing. And you could either have pumpkin butt trousers or you could have petticoat trousers. Pumpkin butts they're like trousers, regular length trousers, but they're pretty loose in the seat. The petticoat trousers are about knee length and they're like a long culotte. And that's just what I happened to have. And it was a hot day and I just put on a pair of, and I realized that they were really comfortable and really useful. Like when you're climbing up, you might be hanging this way and you're putting your foot up here and trying to get up there. There's just like absolutely no binding. They were great. I absolutely loved them. And I have come to the end of my notes here, so that was not quite a wind up here. But I, at this point, can open it up for questions. How are we doing on time?
Start eating before your food gets cold.
Oh, it already has.
They could warm it up for you.
Nah, it's fine.
Yeah. This will give you a chance to take a bite of your cheeseburger there. I would like to know if most authors who are pitching traditional publishers have their manuscripts edited before they pitch.
Well, yeah, I can talk about my personal experience with that. Various things like Linda Collison, the Scholarship Press, and other people. Oh, excuse me. Other people, they come to me with manuscripts that the publisher hasn't seen yet, and they want to get it ready to present to a publisher or an agent. Others have sent it to an agent or a publisher and gotten a positive response, but it needs work. And others have already been sold to the publisher, like the most recent one, the second book. He'd already sold it, but it needed to be cleaned up. And the original editor who had worked with him on the first book, she fired him. But he fired her too, because they weren't getting along. Then I came into the process and I just basically started it over. So anyway, you get stuff from all over the spectrum. Some people just want to get it cleaned up, especially self-publishers, which, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you go with a publisher, you have a gatekeeper and lends a little authority to it. But anyway, you get projects from all over the place. From people who really know what they're doing, and people who don't have a clue. Did I answer your
Yeah, you
question?
did, but it just gave me more questions, but I'll wait till AE until after you have a couple bites.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because the questions come up, I think, you and I were talking about having readers. Do you feel, or other people, what do you do about readers? Do you think it's a good idea to go do it, you finish your first draft and you think it's great to hand it off to a reader before you go maybe to an editor? Is that beneficial? Is it something you recommend? Is it something you've done?
It depends on who they are. I think it's important to develop a stable of readers whose tastes and opinions and experience you respect. I was in a writers group a while back. It started out, it was just like a small core of people. And it was great. We got along really well. And then we let in these two other people who basically wanted to argue about everything, especially about new members, because the way it was originally set up was everybody had veto power. If one person said, no, I don't want that person, it was done. And so they argued and argued and argued, and so we finally changed that. And, because every time we have a vote about a new member, we just say, yeah, whatever, because the argument is too much. Now they're the most employed, and so they have plenty of time to argue all day long. So we all ended up leaving, but we just kind of naturally gravitated towards kind of the same people. One of us had moved to Virginia, but she was still very much involved because the magic of social media. So we'd read each other's stuff, and we knew each other. We knew each other's writing. We knew their weak points. We knew their strong points. We knew what they would object to, what they actually wanted help on, and so that was really helpful. The manuscript I'm working on now for the first read, I had a box worth of notes that people had given me, and I remember the ones that are actually important to the book, and others I don't remember. And there might be some really good stuff in there, but I'm not going to spend 6 months reading it. So that might have been wasted effort. But I don't think so, because you get the feedback from somebody. But there's nothing like one-on-one conversation. You'll remember the really important stuff. So yeah, I think it's extremely beneficial to have readers, but you need to find ones that you trust and respect. Yes.
So I think her question was, do you hand your manuscript off to a reader after the first draft, or do you wait until you have refined it or revised it? And also, where do you get your readers from?
And let me tag one more on top of that. In your stable of readers, how many horses do you have? Or donkeys, or whatever it is?
At the moment, probably 3. There have been more. I think it depends on what you're looking for in the read. If you just want somebody to read it and say, yeah, you're on the right track, that's entirely valid, if they're willing to do that. If you want somebody to get into it, I don't want my readers to edit my stuff. Even though one of them is an editor that I work with, I don't like her editing style. I like her a lot. I like her writing. I think she's a lot of fun. She publishes stuff also. She's really helpful to her community of writers. But I just don't like her editing style. But doing an overview read, she can give me some really beneficial feedback. She could say, yeah, I really like this, or I don't know, I'm not quite sure about that. She's not really willing to get in there and say exactly why. But if she's not forthcoming with praise, then that's included, because I know her. If it had been somebody else, I might miss something, but with her I can't. If somebody wants a deeper edit, an actual edit, I strongly recommend hiring somebody, because that's what they do for a living, and they tend to know what they're talking about. And it's really important to find an editor that you trust, like Jackie, the woman I worked with from the books. A while back, we traded edits. I had a manuscript that I wanted somebody to look at. She had a manuscript she wanted somebody to look at. Neither one of us had much money, so we just traded. I'll do yours if you do mine. And that's the one where she gave me a bunch of feedback that I didn't like, but it was dead on. And her book was a lot cleaner. It was a lot closer to publication. It was a science fiction book. And I'd read a lot of science fiction, but I'd never edited any before. But basically, it was a Western that takes place in an alternate universe. Science fiction books tend to be either nautical fiction or Western set in a place where, if you have anachronisms and you really can't figure out how to use it, you really want this thing, just set it on Alpha Centauri or something, and then you can do whatever the hell you want. As long as the world holds together, that's fine. So, but to get back to your question, it really depends on what you want and where you want it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with sending a first draft to somebody whose opinion you respect and just asking them, what do you think? Am I completely off base, or is this?
No, you answered the question.
No, I mean that's something you could ask them. But thank you.
Take a bite. You're going to die at starvation. I can answer that from the indie side. It's become a little different. They're what's called beta readers.
Yeah.
Is what everyone refers to them now. And a lot of the hot indie authors are moving from. They don't use them so much as feedback, although that helps somewhat. But they're kind of used as a book launch. They submit the book ahead of time to their beta readers, and some of these people may have 50 to 100 beta readers. And the strategy is that they'll start leaving reviews, even when the book's on pre-order, and so they launch that book on launch day. And so these beta readers, these authors are really looking more for the marketing angle, as opposed to getting, a reader likes their stuff fine, but they know they're relying primarily on their editors for the really important feedback. So be careful with that when you hear somebody say, "Oh, I've got all these beta readers that are giving me feedback." It's more and more becoming a marketing technique.
Huh. Wow. It depends on who they are too. Like speaking of George Martin, he was maybe he still is. He was in Albuquerque a while back, and I read a book that had come out of George Martin's writing group. He has a writing group, and this book, the guy talks about it because he's thanking them. He's talking about the various authors in this writers group, and I forget who they are besides George Martin, but just like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Oh yeah, I know that. Oh yeah, I know that guy. They were like power hitters in the fantasy market. And this book, it had been gone over by those guys, and they gave them feedback. And it was a really good book by somebody I'd never even heard of. It's like, who is this guy? I don't know. His first book. And it was just, man, it was a good book. And a lot of it, I'm sure, had to do with the people that he was. How did he get in that writers group in the first place? I don't know.
The other developments happening just recently, and you think you've seen everything in publishing, but on the indie side, there are some editors now that are demanding a byline with the author for editing the book.
What do you mean a byline?
The book is by Susie Witten and the editor. And they will do that. They will. Some of these editors think that somehow that's going to raise their profile, and they may give you a reduced rate for the editing. And if you're an indie author and you're strapped for cash, a lot of them will go that route. But
I listed my editor on my title page.
You did you?
Yeah.
Well, was that by her request? Is it her
No.
request?
Well, the traditional thing to do is in the author's note.
No, it was in my title page. Yeah.
The traditional thing to do is in the author's note, you add, like, to thank my editor, blah, blah, blah. And you're always supposed to add, any mistakes are my own. Right?
Right, exactly.
A recent book I was working on, the guy said, I thank you, Bruce Campbell, and he didn't say mistakes are my own. There's some mistakes that I couldn't talk about. But that's okay. But yeah, I've never heard of such a thing, and I would definitely.
It's just started developing, and it's kind of being discussed in the community. So.
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting.
Good question.
Yes.
When you're editing somebody else's work, how do you make changes to somebody's voice, and how do you discern whether or not you're doing that?
I try to remember it's not my book. You don't want to change the voice. You don't want to change something just to change it. You might be able to. Well, I could accomplish the same task that piece of dialogue does in 25 words rather than 2.5 pages. But it's not my book. So I might, highlight the whole section and say condense, or this paragraph isn't necessary. The scene ended on the previous page. This is not. You don't need it. as lovely as this is, you don't need it. When I find myself doing that, I stop and I backtrack and I take my comments out because it's not my job to rewrite the book. Except in some cases, I have been hired to rewrite the book, in which case I rewrite it. That's what I do. In that case, I'll give the author one chance to change it. Here's what needs to be done, and then if they don't do it, I'm listening to the publisher. I'll go ahead and change it. But when I'm working for an author, even if it's the publisher who's hired me, I don't want to change stuff just to change stuff. I'll give myself free rein oftentimes on the first edit, but then that means I have to go back and I have to take a lot of stuff out and put stuff back the way it was. It's just not my job to do that. So I try not to do that in the first place because it saves me time and trouble. But I will point out, this isn't working. In extreme cases, I might make suggestions about what to say, but even that isn't really my job. I'll just say this isn't working for me because the guy had red hair in two chapters back, and now the guy recognizes him because he's blonde. Stuff like that. I'll point out stuff like that, or things that just aren't where you haven't set this up properly, or Chekhov's gun. You had a gun in the previous chapter. Somebody in this chapter or the next one has to use that gun. They have to shoot. They don't have to shoot somebody, but that gun has to go off. I do think that's true. So I'll point out stuff like that. It's like you wait too long to have this, and you pop this without enough preparation. I try real hard not to rewrite this.
Do you ever do like an analysis? That when you are telling your client what you say anything in general, like about this book, and this is what I liked about it, and then this is where the weak points are. Do you make a statement like that, or is it
Absolutely.
just all in the body of it?
Absolutely. When I'm working for a publisher, working for somebody who's already sold the book, I tend to be a lot closer with the edit. But when I'm working with an author who they're just trying to get the book in shape to show it to somebody,
right.
And it's like basically the final draft before the publisher changes everything around. In that case, what I will do is I will do a synopsis so they can see that this is what I think the book is about. If they think it's about something else, it's like, okay, well, we got a problem because these are the points that you're making, and this is the plot, and these are the important characters, and this is what happens in the story. And I will talk about the story, the presentation of it, the pacing of it, whatever I think might be problematic, and also what's really good. I start out with something positive, like I really like your characters; these are great. And then I'll get into, the story really drags in the middle. You have these chapters in there that are about her family's history, and it's really beautiful writing, but it has nothing to do with the story, and you're going to lose readers. Meaning, I'm falling asleep. I had a hard time doing it. I'm earning my pay. Look at this. And I will also, in that case, I will often do just a short list of anachronisms, a little copy editing thing. This guy has a tattoo on his left arm in chapter 2, and the same tattoo's on his right arm. Stuff like that, but usually I'm not getting into that, but I will, just because I really like copy editing. It's mostly what my training was before I started editing. I'll do a word list. I'll make a character list. This character appears on page 24, and her name is Lisa Thompson. And then for the rest of the book, her name is Linda. Stuff like that. I'll just as I'm reading the book, I'm typing on a separate screen. Okay, this character, this chapter, this character, this page, this event, this page. So they can see. It makes it a lot easier to see.
Talk a little bit about the workflow, how it's done now. Do you still make your notes, edits on paper?
Not for fiction, no.
Okay, so tell us a little bit how that's done.
Okay.
Let's say the author submits, we would think now it's usually a PDF, probably of the manuscript. Is that the way it's usually done? The agent would submit it?
Mm-hmm. No, because I don't want to print it out. I like, pardon me for chewing, I like working on paper. It's a lot easier for me.
Okay.
But, sorry. The way we usually work is the author gives me a Word doc, and then I do the track changes. So the author can look at the manuscript and highlight, notes and changes
and that's true,
everything
that's true
else.
even if you've been commissioned by the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll tell the author to send them Microsoft Word doc.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty standard. I haven't worked on a paper manuscript in 7 or 8 years, I think.
And you'll make your notes digitally on the document.
Absolutely. And what I'll do is if it's a manuscript that's getting closer to publication, if it's like the final edit, before it goes back to the publisher, I will give the author a clean copy with all my edits made and everything. So if they like the edits, it's all there for them, and they don't have to do anything about it. But they can refer back to the edited document, so they can see, no, I wanted that, and they can put it back the way they want. It's just, by that time, it's between them and the publisher. It's fine, I'm out of it. An author I worked with recently knew how to use Word, but he didn't know how to use track changes. Which, I mean, he was really reticent about certain things I'd asked for, and I finally figured out. I texted him. I said, "You don't know how to use track changes, do you?" And he says, "No." So I said, "Okay, now that we know that, let's change tack here." So what I did in that case was I just gave him a red line, which is I made my notes directly in the manuscript in red, so he could see it. I just say, at the bottom of actually at the top of the book, I'd have like a short synopsis of a general thing of the overall book. At the end of each chapter, I'd usually have a little section about the preceding chapter, what worked, the changes he made. Oh yeah, that was great. I'm really glad you did that. And then at the bottom, I had another.
And let's say you're in the situation where you're working for a publisher. Mm-hmm. Are you copying someone at the publisher with
yeah.
And talk a little about how that workflow works.
We do that through email. We'll email me the manuscript.
Will you send your edits to the publisher's representative first?
No, what I'm doing, like for the first edit, this project I worked on recently, we can just take that as an example. Excuse me. For the first round of edits, I just got the manuscript directly from the author. The publisher had the author send me the manuscript. And I read it, I made my notes, made my annotations. I sent it back to the author with the letter or note saying what was going on, and I CC'd the publisher on it, okay. Just so he could see what was going on, what progress was being made with his property that he had paid for, or was going to be paid for. And then on the second round, which was the final round for me, actually. There was another round after that. Again, that one I gave a clean copy to the author and the annotated copy. I sent CC the publisher and gave him copies also.
And in the first round, when the author is responding to you and your edit suggestions, have you ever had situations where there has to be some sort of arbitration by the publisher about what's going to go in the next round of edits?
Not arbitration.
That's too formal a word, but take it up a higher level to we've got a little bit difference of opinion.
I have not been in that position. I'm really
what happens is you're kind of at an impasse.
Well, when it comes down to it, it's the author's work. It is their book. I'm there to make that book as good as possible, and I'm there to represent the publisher's interest and the author's interest. Because oftentimes I can see, well, the publisher thinks now I think it's a silly demand. I wouldn't want to make it, but just to facilitate things, let's go ahead and do it. But you have to remember, it's the author's name on that book. It's their book. It's their baby. So I've never been in that situation, but this project that I was referring to, after I got the final edits back from the author, there were still some ragged ends, and I just mentioned them to the publisher, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, go ahead and do that," or "That's okay, we'll have the copy. We'll just do that in copy editing. Don't even worry about it." I don't remember how it turned out, but it was nothing behind the author's back or anything like that. It was just a little standing at the end, and there are people do that, which was fine with me. I would have been happy to do it just because I like doing it.
And then let's say after you've submitted your final edits, then it goes to the publisher to be typesetting. So, is there another editor that does a final round?
That's where the copy editor comes.
Okay, but that's beyond what you do for the
what I was describing about the novel, that's an overview edit. I was doing story development.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't doing a line edit. I wasn't getting into. I pointed out some anachronisms and things like that, but that really wasn't my job. There are a couple of places where he changed the name, and I just happened to notice it. But I wasn't reading for that. I wasn't reading I wasn't doing a line for line editing. Yeah, that's what a copy editor does. The copy editor prepares a manuscript for the press. That's the loose definition. Yes.
Copy editing, which is a very different skill.
Mm-hmm.
What are your feelings about things like Grammarly.com, some of these mechanical copy editors? I mean, on one hand, they're really great. They catch every friggin' comma. On the other hand, they're not human beings.
They're not human beings. The only thing I use is in Word. You know, it has a little squiggly red line under something. You know, I'll look and see why it's doing that.
Exactly.
Like when I do a spell check. And when you do spell check, what I strongly recommend is I copy the entire text and I paste it into a new document without any formatting. It's text only, because that will catch it. Because the way Word works, if something has been edited and change has been accepted, it won't see that as an error, even if it is an error. So if you copy it without any formatting, it'll catch everything new again when you do your spell check on it. The drawback to that is you have to enter everything by hand into your working manuscript. You can't use that manuscript because otherwise you have to format it all over again. And if you use a lot of italics for ship names or book names, things like that, then that's a pain. So anyway, Microsoft Word is pretty good at that. It'll flag stuff and it'll catch stuff, but it's wrong as often as it is right. I personally wouldn't trust anything else because my eye is pretty good. I've been doing it for a long time. But if you don't trust yourself, if you're a really bad speller or something like that, or you don't know where the commas go.
Commas are my wild.
Oh, commas.
Well, there's Oxford comma and there's the AP newspaper comma.
Deeply and profoundly low.
Most of my career, I used AP style, and then when I switched over to books from newspapers, I had to in Chicago. And
Exactly.
I've become a big fan of the Oxford comma, but to me, it really depends. If it's not ambiguous, if it says what you want to say, don't worry about it. Like Mark Twain, he would always, the thing that really got him mad was when the editor would change his punctuation. And his punctuation is pretty funky sometimes, but it says exactly what he wants to say. It gets the timing right, it gets the pauses right. He was just a brilliant writer. And part of it was his punctuation. On the other hand, I remember this story, he says, I have a deal with my editor. I put in as many varies as I want, and he takes them all out. And we're both happy.
It definitely doesn't take the place of a human editor.
No, it does not.
I ran a manuscript for the first time through Grammarly. I'd never used it before. I was amazed how much it cost. And there's another program I haven't used called ProWrite that a lot of people think it's even better than Grammarly. But I think especially if you're paying an editor by the hour, run it through Grammarly first.
Yeah.
And catch a lot of that stuff that they don't have to
I think it's great for a basic copy edit. And that's not, but I am going to look at everything it flags. I'm not going to just run it through and have it automatically change things. I'm going to look at everything it flags and, no, you're fucking wrong. You do not know what I'm saying, you stupid machine. But, oh yeah, I mean, I had a really good editor go over one of my things, and for some reason, ended up putting it through Grammarly again. It caught things she missed. I was very impressed with it, that I would not.
Not knowing your editor and not knowing the circumstances, I would put in a caveat about she missed, because oftentimes I'll see stuff and it's not worth arguing about.
Yeah.
Or it's like, okay, I can see why they did it that way. I wouldn't have done it that way. So it could be that.
See,
like
it
that.
could have been that. It could have been any number of things. But it was that really drilled down, ditzy.
Yeah, that's what a copy editor
You're
does.
only human. Even a superlative copy editor might have messed up. So.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to work by the page rather than by the hour, and so I'm working for a flat fee. And so, as much as I like to copy edit stuff, I'm not going to. Unless I really, really, really like the project, in which case there have been times where I just spent a lot of time on a project just because I liked it. Or I like the author. This is and it's fun. It takes up a lot of my time, and I'm not getting paid very well for those projects, but they're fun. They're really satisfying. Yes.
Question. So, if you were out to find an editor, for example, you're talking about copy editors, or story development editors, different things. Say you're a new novelist. If I need to find an editor, you go through my book one time. What are we looking for? What's that person you're looking for? And like the description of that editor.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Okay, so say I'm a book. Okay, I need to get an editor on the editor go through this required to submit it to a query or an agent or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about different types of editing, copy editing, the stuff editing. You're talking about more of, and that's copy editing. What should a new author be looking for when they're trying to? Send
Okay, well, it depends. It depends what you want. If you want story development, that's one level. Copy editing is just cleaning it up.
Well, you think it's ready. I'm like, okay, it's ready to go, but I want to send it to an editor. So you think the story is fine, you think everything's fine, but you want to send it out to somebody professional to have a review. What should that person be looking for?
Well, you should be looking for. I would just call it an editor. You look for a fiction editor. I would talk to other writers that who've worked with editors. Get some recommendations. Look on Facebook pages. Every now and then somebody will ask a really nice question, which is, "Hey, are there any editors out there who specialize in whatever it is?" And recently, somebody in a historical novel Facebook page said, "Are there any editors who specialize in nautical fiction? Raise your hand." And a bunch of other people that I hadn't heard of did also, which I thought was really interesting, and I found out about some really interesting people. So I would go for word of mouth, just looking for an editor. If you want just somebody to tighten it up and make sure the commas are in the right place and words are spelled correctly and the story makes sense, you want a copy editor. But in general, just you want an editor, and if you get in contact with somebody, then you can just talk to them and tell them what it is you're looking for. And they can take it from there. They might say, "Well, I don't do that," or "Yeah, absolutely, I can do that." Most of the time, you say, "Absolutely, I can do that." That's just how it is. But I would look for word of mouth. Find editors that other people work with that they liked, or a publisher that you like that publishes books that you like. But, find out what your sources. Ask them. Who does your editing? I have a manuscript. I would really like to work with an editor to get this, and she can recommend somebody.
So just ask the publisher.
Yeah, ask a publisher, ask editors. There's somebody came to me a while back. They had gone with an online service, and she really talked me down because they'd done a rock bottom price on her previous book. But I really liked the book, so I did it for that price. It was $2.50 a page, I think, which is I didn't make much money on it, but it was really fun. I really liked working with her. And I've worked with her since, on other projects. But, she'd gone with the online service, and so she had some experience. And what she wanted was the synopsis, the summation, all the stuff I talked about earlier. I started doing it that way because that's what she'd asked for. I thought, "Oh, okay, well, this actually makes sense, and it helps me understand the book a lot better." So I would say word of mouth, and just say you're looking for an editor, and then explain exactly what it is you're looking for. And we can take it from there.
So how did you come about deciding to charge by the page instead of by the word, or by the word, or like?
Well, charging by the page is the same as charging by the word. There are 250 words to a page. I don't care how big or small the font is that you choose, how big your pages are. There's 250 words to a page. That's standard. It goes way back to TypeScript. Those amounts, you can do research and you can find out what people are charging for editing.
Some are by the hour, like you mentioned, which you don't have a cap on.
Right, and you have to trust somebody you don't know to keep track of their time properly. And in my experience, people are professionals. They do. They don't pad their accounts. But you never know.
Exactly. So, the fixed price is kind of good, but I was just wondering why you just decided to go, with the page, that it's easier to calculate, or...
Yeah, and, what you really do want to do is you want to look at the manuscript before you settle on a price. Because if it's a clean manuscript, and the author knows what they're doing, I could do it for a lot less, because I'll spend a lot less time on it. I could do that job for $3 a page. I did a book recently. It was $10 a page, just because there was so much work involved. And sometimes, like I did a book that was an absolute mess from a grammar standpoint. The person really didn't know how to write, but she was a really good storyteller and really enthusiastic, and it was a lot of fun. So it was a lot of work. I figured, well, what the hell is she talking about here? And I had to figure out how to say it, how to communicate to her that something wasn't working, why, things like that, because she didn't really understand. But that was a lot of work. But that was a job that I did for lower
So
price just
basically,
because
what
it was
you're
fun.
doing is you're really teaching someone how to write.
In that case, I was.
Yeah.
But other people already know, and they're just looking for somebody to clean it up and make sure it makes sense and is the scene actually working.
So if you're working with somebody independently and you have all these edits for them and you give it to them and they do whatever it is they do they come back to you again as part of that pricing package, or do you charge a second time for that second
I
package?
usually do 2 passes
Okay.
for one price. Like right now, I'm working on an anthology, and I'm starting getting stories that are in the second round with the author's notes and stuff like that.
Right.
Basically, I've already been paid for those,
Man.
but I still have to do them. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to tell. I don't need any change. I don't need a change. So.
That's quite all right. So what was the question?
Just the second pass around.
Oh yes,
that's
yes,
included.
yeah. That's part of the deal usually. A third pass, the one I did for a publisher a while back. There was a third pass involved. It was just how they did it, and that was fine with me because they were paying
And that's through
me
the
very well.
publisher, right?
Yeah, that was through a publisher rather than through the author.
Yeah, I had read somewhere, I don't know if it's true, I didn't verify it, but the Till and Mockingbird, Harper worked with the publisher and her editor for 3 years before that book was released.
Yeah, that was another.
That was another era.
Thomas Wolfe he'd have boxes he'd send to
but they don't
Maxwell
do that
Perkins.
anymore, do they?
No, they saw that, they kicked you out of the office.
Well, editors used to be a lot like George Martin for the Beatles, right?
Yes.
I mean, they came up with these fantastic singles, man, they're great songs, but a lot of the process, what they would do is John and Paul would throw something together, they come into the studio, they work out the arrangements, they play it, they do a couple of takes, and then, okay, we're off. And George Martin would sit down in the studio with a pair of scissors and start cutting.
And
putting the songs together.
Maxwell Perkins' job was to keep the writers from getting drunk.
Yeah, the New York publishers were, I mean, a lot of those classic books,
Yes.
a lot of that was because of the editors.
Yeah, you just wonder if writers like that would even make it today, whether they get through the process.
They'll be self-publishing and not making any money at it. I mean, that's not a sneer. I just don't think.
I don't think the publishing houses would have put up with it.
No.
Things change.
Write drunk, edit sober.
I used to. Yeah, I don't drink it all anymore. But yeah, it's nice. I think that what that really means is you just pound it out. Don't let yourself get in your own way when you're writing it, because you can't edit something that isn't on the page. Get it out. You can always clean it up later.
One of the other things Huntington said is first draft of anything is shit.
Absolutely. Sometimes
That
fifth and
gives me
sixth
hope.
too.
It gives me hope when that one just wrote. It's like, oh, it's supposed to be that bad.
Yeah, when you finally get to the point where you're looking at it and you can honestly say, "Hey, this isn't bad," then you get in
Depending
there.
on the day, like, this is shit, and like, oh, I'm brilliant,
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd be brilliant one day, and the very next day, the same thing is just moronic.
That's what my husband says, insecure writer's redundant. Because one day, oh my God, I am fucking Agatha Christie. And the next minute, oh my God, why did they even let me near the process?
I don't think she had those moments, though. I don't know.
She did.
She did?
Yeah, I
Oh, wow.
seem to remember reading something about that. She could be very insecure at times, but it's kind of like Dorothy Sayers. We get in people's faces too.
Shirley Jackson. I mean,
Brilliant
brilliant writer.
Shirley Jackson. I mean, I never read any of the horror stuff.
I had
The Haunting of Hill House has one of the best openings ever. It's just about this house, and it sets the whole story up. And it's very long, it has 7 columns and everything. It's a very complex sentence, but it just flows really nicely. And by the time you're done with the first paragraph, you got the hair sticking up on the back of your neck. You're, okay, this is gonna be good.
Look at this. This is called
The Haunting of Hill House. What's that?
That's why I'm not going to read it.
Oh, it's great. It's great.
I am the worst chicken.
The point of view character is dessert.
Oh yeah, no.
She has no idea that she is. She's harmless, but she's batshit.
Really? No, it's I've read bits and pieces of Stephen King. I cannot read it. His husband will not let me because he wants to sleep at night.
When I first moved to Santa Cruz years ago, and I was sleeping on a friend's couch, and I had a job interview the next morning, and I was a little nervous about it. I couldn't sleep. And there was a copy of The Shining sitting there, and I'd never read it. I've heard of this. This will put me to sleep. 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh man, I gotta find out what happened.
Yeah, damn it, I hate that.
But years ago, before I got into editing, I was doing production, and I was a typesetter back when that was an actual job.
Yeah.
And one of the gigs I had was doing a bunch of upmarket editions of Stephen King's books, lots and lots of them. And so, for a period of 3 or 4 months, I was paid to sit there and read Stephen King, and it's like time to get out. That was really fun.
Have you read, since you used to do actual typesetting, have you ever read Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's book, Good Omens?
Mm-hmm.
It's got some typesetting jokes in there.
Oh, really?
You might get a kick out of it. The errors in the Bible. Put there by
Let's not get started on errors.
No, not theological errors. Typos in the Bible.
Oh, really?
That were put there, and apparently there were some, where they're typesetting and they screwed up
Or did they do it on purpose?
Well, one of my favorite typesetting stories, getting into that, was this guy named Chalfant. He was an early American settler in eastern California, in Owens Valley. And when he was a young man, he set out with a wagon train. He's on his own. He set out with a wagon train from Independence, Missouri, and he got into an argument a few days out with the wagon master. So rather than wait for another train, he just set off by himself. He had a shotgun, some lead and powder, and a bag of corn. And he started walking to California. And the Indians were just like, well, he's got nothing worth taking, and he's completely harmless. Fine, sit down, have some dinner. See you later, and he's just passing through. So he walked to California, and he got himself.
He did walk.
He walked to California as a young man, and got a job at a newspaper. Newspapers were really important at the time. Bought a press, and he started a radical kind of leftist, we would call it today, newspaper. He was very anti-Confederate. Southern California was very Confederate sympathizing back in the day, and he was an outspoken critic of that. But I know all this because I read his autobiography, which he typeset. He wrote as he was typesetting it. He was compositing it as he wrote. That's what they say. I wasn't there to verify it, but that's what they say. And it was just like in the old days, people would write these long, long letters. That's how they communicated. They're so beautifully put together, just so beautifully
They're
composed.
written in two different directions sometimes on the same page.
Right, yeah. Turn it up. Yeah, you can
How do you spell his name?
He's writing it backwards.
Chalfant. Chalfant.
F-A-F-what?
F-A-N-T. Chalfant.
Is there anything named after him?
Out in the Owens Valley, yeah.
There may be a font named after him.
No.
No?
He was just a newspaper man.
This is somehow familiar.
The newspapers in those days, it wasn't his paper, but it was another paper. The owner, the editor was often the owner, and the pressman too. He had business he had to take care of, and he was gone for a couple of weeks. And he came back and he found out that his sub-editor had completely changed the paper from a pro-union paper to a pro-Confederate paper.
Oops.
They had shootouts in the press room, stuff like that. It was pretty crazy days back then.
I was reading one of the papers in 1870 in L.A. The ladies are getting together for a memorial for General Lee, and I'm like, that wouldn't go over so big now. No, they were very, very It was a scary place if you were Union.
There's a lot of food for historical novels there too. There was a very small but very important battle in New Mexico. Kit Carson was there.
Goliata, was it?
I can't remember. It was outside of Santa
Goliata
Fe.
Pass, yeah.
That's what it was. A very small group, but if the Confederates had managed to get through, they would have united California with the Confederacy in southern New Mexico and Arizona.
Sooner because we entered as a free state, and I think people up north were more Union. I don't recall. I kind of skipped the Civil War.
Oh yeah. No, the Northern California is pro-Union. Very definitely.
Yeah, that's where Sacramento is. I love this stuff. And it's just so fun reading the actual accounts.
Mm-hmm.
I love the newspapers.
What else have you read?
What else have I read?
Yeah, newspapers like interesting stuff.
I was doing Actually, I was doing some of the city council notes. I have an advantage. My husband is the archivist for the city of Los Angeles. And so I have some, well, anybody actually has access to it, but he's really good about pulling stuff for me, God bless him. And so I was reading through, there was a city council meeting in which one of the city councilmen, and it was a man, objected to the appointment of this particular public servant because the city council wanted to appoint somebody because he had been elected the previous December, and the one city council member who objected literally said, no, we don't want to do this because he wasn't elected, he wasn't even on the ballot. And Michael went back to the election, and sure enough, the guy wasn't on the ballot. But they liked that they appointed him anyway.
That's some really nice corroboration.
Yeah. Well, that brings up one of the toughest things I have to do when I'm writing historically, gender-specific language.
Oh, yeah. Racism.
Racism too, and I do have to deal with that. That's really tough to deal with. But I keep saying city council member. No, it's city council man.
There's another false Mark Twain quote that I read recently was, I forget who the person was that Twain was talking about, but he says, Freud, that's right, yeah, I met a Dr. Freud while I was in Europe. He's of the opinion that every man is obsessed with sex. Obviously, he's never met Mrs. Twain. And I was just struck by, okay, every man, but he's talking about a woman, you know. It's like,
yeah. Well, no, actually, the term scientist I read recently from a man who's a science librarian over at Harvey Mudd pointed out that Elizabeth Somerville, a science writer, she was a science writer in the early to mid 19th century in England. She's the person for whom Somerville College, with the Women's College, Oxford. They had to come up with the term scientist for her because she was so eclectic, you couldn't call her a biologist or a botanist or something like that. She was writing about the entire spectrum of the sciences, but you couldn't call her a man of science because she was a man. And that was the most fascinating thing.
wow. Anybody else have?
I find obituaries.
Oh yeah.
Like one character I had to research, a full page on an obituary didn't mention his wife, and that was the nugget that I was looking for. Tell me something about the woman he was married. They don't even mention his wife or children in the obituary. And I guess that was quite common. People.
The wife was the adjunct of the husband. We had a question back here.
Yeah, going back to your career as a writer.
My so-called career.
Huh?
My so-called career, but yeah.
When you start out, you get an idea for a book. How do you start doing? How do you develop it from there? Do you plot it out, or exactly how much work do you go to as far as outlining it?
Okay, well, that's a good question. I tend to write by the seat of my pants.
Okay.
And like work in progress. One of my editor friends, Dr. Q, insisted that I try outlining it. Seat of the pants is great, but you have to take it out a lot of stuff that you get a lot of false starts, which is true. And so this one I outlined it, and it was great for a first draft, but then I read the first draft and it didn't make any sense. So I had to go back and rearrange stuff and take stuff out and go back to writing by the seat of the pants. This is just how I do. Other ideas, I was camping in Yohan's Valley in a place called Convict Lake. I was curious why it was called such a thing, and it turned out that in 1871, a bunch of guys busted out of the Nevada State Penitentiary, Carson City, and most of them were rounded up within a day or two. But this one group of 6 or 7 guys headed south, robbing people and shooting people. They went on a crime spree. They're heading south. And there was a big shootout at this place that had been called San Pedro Lake or something like that. And it was called Convict Lake after that because there was a shootout with the sheriff's posse. And so the pattern developed that, because I started doing research, I wanted to find out about this, and I was getting hold of all the local histories that I could. And so these guys, this had this pattern. The local sheriff in each county would get together a posse and they chased them until they got out of the county. And they're like, okay, we're done with that because these guys had guns and they shot back. And it'd be sort of like a bunch of farmers and cattlemen and stuff like that. They're not, it wasn't like cowboys in the movies. Everybody was armed, knew how to do it. Most people didn't even carry a gun. And so anyway, I just followed the story, and it was such a great story. I had to use it for something. And like, there's this one kid. One of them was 16 or 17 years old, and he, during the initial shootout at the prison, the warden's daughter was caught in the courtyard in the crossfire, and he actually ran and got her and put her in another room. But then he broke out with these guys, and so he ended up becoming separated. And he walked into the posse's camp. This one sheriff was just determined, kind of like in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This one guy kept chasing him, and he had like a few core guys, and he kept rounding up people as he went, and they would melt away as soon as the shooting started. But this kid walked into the camp and said, "You can hang me now, just give me a cup of coffee first."
Oh.
He ended up being pardoned. He actually, because of what he'd done with the warden's daughter, they actually got him loose after he did in jail for robbery, I think. This other guy, the worst of them, last time anybody saw him, he was crossing the Panamints into Death Valley. There was a line that says, as far as anybody knows, he's still there. It's like, wow, I got to use that. So anyway, I started putting pieces together. They gave me the spark of the story, and I was like, okay, I want to tell it from this kid's point of view. And it just never came together. I tried writing it as a movie script. I tried writing it as a novel. I tried writing it for first person. I could just never get that story together. Maybe just because there was so much actual true events there that I wanted to put in. I couldn't figure out the story. I couldn't figure.
Yeah, no, I've had that problem. I already wrote the sequel to Death of the Zion Heron. It's based on the death of William Warren, city marshal in L.A. He was killed by his deputy, Joseph Dye.
Wow.
And yes, people in L.A. were pretty much carrying guns all the time because it was a very.
It was a rough town. Yes, it was.
It's extremely bad. I had that same kind of, okay, where do I keep it true to what actually happened? How do I keep, and because I'm an author and it's fiction, I'm setting up that he was killed by somebody else in another manner. Mm-hmm. So how do we reconcile that with the newspaper accounts of the event and everything?
Well, you could, as long as your conclusions don't contradict. It's like, this happened. Well, how could what I want to have happen and still jive with historical facts? You could do that.
Yeah.
It's like, what nobody saw was the guy in the corner who actually shot him.
Well, no, he wasn't actually shot. Well, in the book,
well, man, it shot Liberty Balance. Yeah.
And you do the author note at the end. Yeah, he really was shot.
That's another way of handling it. You can change things around for your story and just acknowledge it in the author's note, but you do have to acknowledge it somewhere.
Yeah, you have to know. I mean, I have another book I was screwing around with the death of President Harding. Because there was such a big kerfuffle when he passed that somebody actually killed him.
But quite often, even primary sources aren't accurate.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
George Saunders in Lincoln in the Bardo confronts that, and he'll give examples of, one night you have 4 different people. It was a full moon. It was a clear night. It was a raging storm.
Sure. Sometimes people don't remember, right? Sometimes they flat out lie. Sometimes they're writing from a distance.
Exactly. So you have to be, there's a certain amount of slop in the historical record.
Oh, absolutely.
There was a National Park ranger at Gettysburg who wrote a book. One of the best, it should be required reading of historical novels. I wish I could think of the name of it, but he went back and found out that much of what we know about the Battle of Gettysburg was based on supposed eyewitness testimony. But what happened was there was one man, a Union officer, who was appointed to go around and find out what actually happened, because in the fog of war, nobody knew what was going on out there. And he spread his idea of what happened, and he'd tell these men, and they got in their heads that that's what actually happened, even though they were there. And a lot of these veterans went to the graves believing they saw one thing.
Yeah.
And it was impossible to have happened. Mm-hmm. So memory it's a very slippery thing.
And let's face it, one of the first things you learn when you're reporting is eyewitness testimony is often the worst there is, especially in a time of crisis, because I know, if we saw an accident happen out there, we could have at least 5 different cars than what were actually there.
Yeah.
Russia mode.
The brain is an amazing organ that does some pretty wonky things.
Yeah,
You see
like
what
that.
you want to see.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You see what you want to see. Quite often.
Yeah, like I said, I read a lot of crime fiction these days, and one thing that holds true is I read true crime also. It's like eyewitness testimony is the most unreliable testimony.
That's interesting. I was just starting to listen to this book about the Chinese gangs in New York in the 20s.
Oh,
And
that's fascinating.
the author opens it up, and it's an audiobook, and it's about 20 minutes of that audiobook was just talking about his research and why it's different with everybody else's, and the newspapers are different, and he's like qualifying everything. And so now I'm going to start chapter 1. But I give this whole huge prelude about why his research might be different, and that there's the way that newspapers were back then, and the racism and the names, so the names were changed, and this is why this person might be named something else. So it's interesting to qualify, so then you can tell your story.
Yeah.
You got to go up front.
If you read the Chinatown Wars, this research, the newspaper had 2 different names for the gal at the center of the shooting in New York. It was like, and she was a Chinese prostitute, that was the dispute.
But there's the beginning that saves you, right? Saves
And
you
they
from-
just kept changing their names, and so I finally just screwed around with it on my career and said, hell, this is what her name is.
Yeah, I think if you could do something plausible, that it's okay. You know, it's like General Lee was actually transsexual. You know, it's just like, you know, if you can make that plausible and make it work, then God bless you, go for it.
Just
What's that?
Well, there's probably going to be a cranky historian out there who's
He always insisted on being referred to as they, so that.
Let me ask you a question about that. The
Yes.
thing. So, is most of your work, when you're editing, is it from the publisher? Are you paid by the publisher? So is it always by the author?
When I work for the publisher, I'm being paid by the publisher.
So the publisher will sometimes say, well, this needs more work, this is back to the author, then the author then has to go to you? Or is it like the publisher will say, oh, this needs more work, can you cut this up, or how does that?
Well, usually what I do is I just keep the publisher informed, and then I send them what I would consider a finished manuscript, and then they can accept it or not. It's up to them. But I've not had a publisher take a hands-on approach, because the more people you have working on a project, the more confusing it gets, and the thing that will infuriate an editor more than anything else is when you give them something to work on, and they're working on it, and you go back and you make more changes, and you say, oh, I made these changes, and you give it to them. Because they have to start over. They have to read the whole thing all over again. And so, you know, when and I still run into it today. My day job is I work for an ad agency, and just the other day I was working on an online job, and I noticed, whoop, the account person's name is on listed on his job as somebody who's working on this. So I walked over to what's going on. She was working on the job while I was working on it. And I said, I'm stopping right here. Give it to me when you're ready.
That's the nice thing about Google. You know when somebody else is doing it.
So it's usually the publisher is going to be paying the fee.
If the author has already sold the manuscript to the publisher, then the publisher is the one who's paying for it. That's one reason why your royalties from a publisher are not 50-50. It's because they're fronting all the costs. If you're doing an online, like an ebook with a publisher, their costs are a lot less, and so I think your royalties should be a lot higher. But anyway, once the author has sold a manuscript to the publisher's handling all those costs. That's part of the deal.
Whereas the publisher, like I said, gives it back to the author, saying it needs more work, send it back to them to have it work on some more.
Oh, absolutely.
The author has to go out and find the editor at that point, give it themselves, and then get it back to you.
Yeah, the only time I ever missed a deadline in my life was because an editor sent the manuscript back, and I was working on something else and had to do this too, and I didn't like the changes, and I dragged my feet, and I got one of those letters that you don't want to get, which is, if you don't make these changes and get them back to us soon, we're going to have to bump the publishing fee up. And, you know, when you get out of line, when you miss your spot with the printer, you don't just go to the next person, you go to the end of the line. So that's why deadlines are so strict, and that's why publishing dates are so far out. It might be, you know, the manuscript's ready to go, but it won't be in print for another year and a half. So anyway, the publisher handles all of that stuff, and if the publisher wants you to make a change, you don't have to, but you don't have to be published either. So it depends on what kind of, how important it is to you. You know, if it's really, really, really important that this person wore a red coat under the uniform when they went into battle, then do it. But you know, if you make a case, I think publishers are going to retire the young. And if you got a deal with Random House, do what they say. Anybody else?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.